Hello and welcome to the Opelex podcast. My name is Abhijit Kshirsagar. I'm a professor at the Indian Institute of Technology, Dharwad. With me on this podcast is my friend Dr. Lalit Patnaik, who works at CERN and is joining us from Geneva, Switzerland.
This podcast is a part of the Open Power Electronics Network, or Opelex for short. Come check it out at opelex.net. That's opelex.net. You can also follow us on Twitter. We are at OpelexNet.
Have you wondered how electrical energy is generated, transferred, stored, and used? How AC voltages in a mains outlet are converted to DC voltages for your phone or laptop? Or how a UPS converts the DC voltage from a battery into AC for appliances? How do wireless chargers work? And how about those super fast chargers for electric cars? These applications and many more are all made possible by power electronics. That is, the use of semiconductor devices and circuits to control and convert electrical energy.
Today, power electronics is everywhere, not just in electric vehicles and their chargers. Every laptop or cell phone charger is a power electronic circuit. UPSs and battery backup inverters are power electronic equipment too. Most new home appliances now have power electronic circuits to convert mains AC voltages to DC, such as TVs, LED lamps, washing machines, air conditioners. The list is endless. Power electronic circuits are also used for high voltage and high power applications in industrial settings and for converting power from solar panels and wind turbines into AC power for the grid.
In this podcast, we will talk about the exciting world of power electronics, latest news, cutting-edge research, career options, education pathways, open source projects, and much more. We'll also touch on many related topics such as power generation, sustainable energy, and policy issues.
Whether you are a student, professional, maker, hobbyist, entrepreneur, or just someone curious about this field, this podcast is for you. Over the coming weeks, we will be talking to leading academics, industry professionals, entrepreneurs, and other leaders in power electronics and allied fields. We hope you will find this useful and entertaining. Hello Abhijit.
Hi Lalit, how are you?
I'm good. How are you? Long time.
Yes, I'm well. How are you doing with all the coronavirus related restrictions?
It's reasonably okay here in Geneva, especially compared to some of the other countries. So, we might be having a second wave or so, but it's okay for now. We are going to work as usual with masks and physical distancing. How about you?
Situation here is of course improving. Schools and colleges are still going to remain closed. Hopefully things improve, and this has really been an unforeseen situation in so many ways. Yes. I mean, I don't see any aspect of life that has gone untouched by this.
Yeah, that is true. We are all facing a new world. In any case, our podcast is trying to, let's say, stay in our lane, which is the world of power electronics.
Yes.
Maybe I will ask you how you got into power electronics. Did you always have a plan to get into power? What brought you into this field?
It's an interesting story because I was not even in electrical engineering in my bachelor's. So I did my bachelor's in electronics and instrumentation. Mm-hmm. And fortunately for me, the program was not very narrowly focused. It had a wide subject matter. Mm-hmm. So we studied electrical power, we studied communications, of course we studied instrumentation, we studied embedded systems. So the program did give us a very, very broad overview of all of the sort of components of electrical engineering or electronic product development. Mm-hmm. What I didn't know at the time was that ISC's CEDT program, the Electronics Design Masters, was the logical next step. And it was only in my final year that I found that the program existed, and I was fortunate to get admitted into that. And then, so that's how I went from instrumentation into electronic system design. It covers everything from PCB design, embedded systems, EMI, EMC, and at the time I also studied power electronics for the first time formally under Professor Umanan. And that was really the turning point in my journey, because that's when I actually started to really appreciate, understand, and enjoy power electronics. And I think they say a good teacher can make or break the subject. And Umanan sir definitely did a great job of teaching and guiding and sort of conveying the really important parts or the salient fun parts of this subject. And that's how I got into power electronics. I joined for a PhD under his guidance. So that's how I went from not really in my BTech, not really knowing what kind of a job I was getting into or what sort of industry I would end up into. And then, 10, 12 years later, I was firmly embedded in the academic research track in power electronics and energy systems.
Excellent.
How about you, Lalit? Did you always plan to get into power electronics before you came for your masters, or did you have some other plans?
Not really, actually. I would say that when I was finishing my bachelor's, which was in electrical engineering, I somehow was more attracted towards communication. I especially liked the math part of all the communication stuff. And I even wanted to do a master's in that. But I think, if I remember correctly, I was supposed to go to the US for a master's in communication, but there were visa issues. I didn't go. I joined a startup in Bangalore. And then I heard good things about the same program that you mentioned, the master's in electronics design at Indian Institute of Science. And some of my, let's say, seniors in the company were products of that program, much more senior than me, and I was interested. I remember passing by the IISc campus because I was living in the area. And you see the lush green trees on the other side of the wall, and you think, okay, I want to be on that side of the wall. And I was really happy when I made it through the entrance.
Right.
And once I got in, I would say the story is very similar to what you told. I mean, a good teacher, an excellent teacher, has a huge impact. I came with a kind of a bias towards communication, and in the very first semester, there were a number of excellent courses, but of course, Professor Umanan's course on power converters, I think it was called DPC, Design of Power Converters. Oh, that really changed my mind and attracted me towards power electronics. That was my invitation to power electronics. And since then, I just went on initially taking more and more courses in the power side of things. And then, like you, I also decided to do my PhD with Professor Umanand. So we have a lot of parallel in that respect of our journey, basically.
And since our listeners are probably not very familiar, I should also point out that the way the power group in CEDT works, we have two faculty members, both excellent. And I have been fortunate to get guidance from both of them during masters as well as PhD, and even later. And Professor Umanand and Professor Gopakumar, who are excellent teachers, excellent advisors, and I think excellent engineers.
Definitely.
So that goes a long way in I think standing on the shoulders of giants, as they say.
Yeah. And both of them are just, in terms of just people, they are just excellent people to be around, have conversations with, not just on power electronics, on anything you pick up in the world. So it was so awesome to be in that environment, always learning from one another.
Absolutely. I remember we used to have the midday coffee breaks, which I think is where most of our ideas, or at least for me, most of the great ideas for my research and even otherwise, that's how they came about.
Yes.
So Lalit, what have you been doing since you left ISC? That was in 2016, am I right?
After I left ISC in Bangalore, I for the first time left the country to join a postdoc program at University of Ontario Institute of Technology. That's what they called it back then. Now they have changed their name, rebranded it to Ontario Tech University. So I joined a lab of Professor Sheldon Williamson, who holds a Canada Research Chair position there. And his research group focuses on transportation electrification. So all kinds of technologies that go into electric vehicles, drones, and basically all kinds of electric mobility.
So you said transportation electrification. So as I recall, I think there's some work he's done on electrification of ships as well, right?
Yes, that is also one of the things they are looking at. Basically, I would say they span a broad spectrum of power levels, right? From bike to buses is what the terminology we use.
Right.
So I would say that at Ontario Tech, I was working with a number of different graduate students on a few different projects.
Right.
So in most of those projects, it was the graduate students leading the work, and I was just there to provide support if they needed technical support or something like that. I would say there was one project where I myself thought I should do some of the legwork instead of having the students do it, and that is on lithium-ion battery charging, and that's one of I would say one of the highlights of my experience in Ontario Tech was about developing this new charging scheme for lithium-ion batteries for charging them faster. So that was my experience in Canada, and I guess you also did something similar after your PhD. You delved into postdoc.
Yes, I was very fortunate. I got a position with Professor Ned Mohan as a postdoctoral fellow, and of course, I don't need to provide any introduction to Professor Mohan.
Yes.
Almost all of us have either used his books, seen his videos, heard him speak. And he is a great researcher, he's a great educator, and like you, I left the country for the first time and really got to see a very different, it was an expanding of horizons, to see academic research in a more applied sense. And I'm pretty sure it was much colder, so that was the first time that I had experienced temperatures below zero.
Yes.
This time I saw temperatures of minus 40 Celsius. So that was a jump.
Actually, now that you mentioned temperature, I just got reminded, I had to say this. People often asked me from India, so how is Canada? How is Canada? And I was like, the place is cold, but the people are warm.
I think the same applies to Minnesota. So so there I had the chance to work on a number of projects. I was advising students. I was working on my own research on MMCs, and did a lot of outreach as well. So that was an interesting experience. I also got to work on a lot of multidisciplinary projects. So I worked on a project where the objective was to design and optimize an LED system for indoor grow lights. And that was, of course, our role was power electronics, but, seeing the context of the problem. So how do power electronics constraints or design requirements fit the end application? So that was a really nice experience as well.
Yeah. And it's a very unique application, for power electronics.
It absolutely is. So Lalit, after Toronto, I think you're now in Europe.
Yes, I made another move. It was a position for developing power supplies for installation in the Large Hadron Collider tunnel. And I found it interesting. I applied for it. I got lucky and got in. So here at CERN, I would say I have changed my application again, because now I am powering, you can say it's like an SMPS, a switched mode power supply that you have these silver boxes for computers. You can say it's something like that, because what I'm powering is a computer. It's just that the computer is installed in the tunnel 100 meters underground. And this is not very high power, just 100 watts or so. And the main challenge here is to have it radiation tolerant. So because you have these high energy protons colliding and you have all kinds of radiation coming through, and you want to ensure that the power electronics still works under these conditions. So that is what
why does it need to be radiation tolerant? And so what if there's radiation? What's going to happen to power electronics?
Yeah, that's a very nice question, and this is also, I would say, in some sense similar to what happens in space applications. They also have the same requirement, radiation tolerance or even radiation hardness. So basically the point here is any power converter or for that matter any electronics you install in normal terrestrial conditions generally does not see a high level of ionizing radiation. But in these very unique scenarios, you can have high levels of ionizing radiation, which can structurally, let's say, change something in the semiconductor devices or induce certain types of currents and change the behavior of...
Are you saying temporary damage, or you're talking about permanent damage?
In fact, there are both kinds of phenomena. Some which cause a temporary spike in voltage or
like
current.
A switching,
and some which is like a permanent damage, but it's like a slowly changing. You can look at it as certain parameters in the device slowly drifting out because of these accumulated dose. So Abhijit, tell us what brings you back to India? You were in the US, and there were definitely, I believe, lots of opportunities for power electronics engineers in the US. Walk us through what made you do that, and what is it that you're doing now?
Of course, it's hard to define exactly what tipped the scales in terms of moving back. But of course, some personal reasons, mostly professionally, I think India is one of the biggest new markets for power electronics and energy systems, and we are going to see a huge boom in the demand for all manner of applications in power electronics, whether it's electric vehicles, renewable energy, just smart appliances. There's a big market coming up, and we are going to need engineers. And me being an academic, I thought that my fullest potential would be to come back to academia in India, where I could contribute directly towards workforce development and at the same time interact with companies, startups. We have a lot of bright minds who are setting up new startups. So if you look at the number of electric two-wheeler startups that are coming up, I think it's phenomenal, and they are all doing fairly good business. So that way I thought it would be nice to come back and sort of assist. And also India just witnessed the launch of the Tata Nexon, which is a 300 kilometer plus range purely electric vehicle. And I think that's a major milestone for the Indian electric automotive industry. I think the Nexon marks a big step in this direction.
And there is also this big market for two-wheelers, electric bikes basically.
Absolutely. There's a huge market for electric two-wheelers. So there's a big push towards both renewables, electric vehicles, and so on. So I think there's going to be a big demand for engineers who understand the entire product life cycle from idea to product. And there's going to be a big demand for power electronics engineers who understand the bigger picture. Right, so you can't just build the motor controller, you can't just build the battery charge controller without understanding everything else that goes into the product.
Yeah, I mean, it's also a similar situation in the Europe as well. It's just that I would say the market is probably not as big as the potential market in India, but Europe has also been making the changes towards sustainable technology. So all the stuff that you mentioned.
That brings up another big issue that we have with pure renewables, and that is both unpredictability as well as variability. And the only reasonable way to address it is apparently grid storage or grid scale energy storage, and that again involves some power electronics. So the demand for power electronics skills and technology is going to be immense. Unfortunately, one thing that we both have seen and experienced is that it's not always very easy to get into the field or find out what the state of the art is or what the latest challenges are. And I hope that we in this podcast are going to be able to bridge that gap and bring what is the latest in the field, all of these closer to our listeners.
Yeah, and in fact, I look forward to the conversations we have with all these experts, because they come from diverse backgrounds, and what they tell us about their experiences and their, let's say, view of the future of this field. That would be a very interesting thing for me personally as well.
So, dear listeners, we have interesting speakers lined up, and we'll be speaking to them about all of these topics that we talked about. And we hope to see you on the next episodes in this series. Thank you.
See you next time.
The Opelex podcast is a part of the Opelex project. You can follow us on Twitter. We are at OpelexNet. You can email us at opelexpodcast@gmail.com for feedback, questions, comments, and suggestions. This podcast is hosted by me, Abhijit Kshirsagar, and Lalit Patnaik. Mixing and sound engineering is by Sudarshan Karthik, and additional support comes from Najat Abdul Aziz.